Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for taking time on this absolutely gorgeous Williams Day to come inside from this beautiful weather to hear this panel on one of the most important topics, I think, personally, I think you could listen to. By the way, the updated weather forecast, if you haven't heard, there is 0% chance of rain for the remainder of the weekend. So I think we're looking good. We're facing, as many of you know, a crisis, an epidemic across the United States and across the world, particularly acute in the US, of mental health issues. And Williams, of course, as a microcosm of the US, as a microcosm of the world, faces those issues as well. As the class of '93 reunion chair, I'm proud that our class has chosen to make a bit of an unusual gift and one that is critically important in funding the Center for Integrative Wellbeing. We think this is a very palpable and important need here at Williams to be able to provide additional help to those who need it the most. It's something that's been lacking for a long time. It's something that Williams has staff and physicians have been working on and have been looking forward to having some additional resources brought to bear, and now they will be with the gift of our class. So it's thrilling to be a part of that, and our 530 members of our class, thank you for your contributions, for any of you in the audience. And if you want to, if you haven't given yet and you wish to, I'm sure the folks at the college would be happy to receive that. It's my pleasure to turn it over to Chad Orzel, who'll talk about, it will be our moderator today with our esteemed panelists, talking about integrative well-being and how important it is both at Williams and across the U.S. Chad, turn it over to you. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much, Tom. And I'd like to echo Tom's comment, thanking all of you for coming in, because given what a nice day it is, I appreciate you taking the choice to come inside and hear what can be kind of a heavy topic. So we're going to talk about mental health issues here, both on campus and sort of more broadly. This is a topic that can be somewhat fraught, and so I'll warn you up front that there may be some kind of heavy things said at various points, but we're going to try and end on a sort of upward trajectory. It sends you out into the nice weather on an up note if things go according to plan. So, but I want to start off by saying a little bit about our panelists here. I'm going to go not in order, but I guess in alphabetical order. First up is Dr. Wendy Adam, who has a long resume with experience in private practice, in government, working in the Health Resources Services Administration, in academia at a number of institutions, including Baylor, Grand Valley State, and Central Connecticut State. And since 2016, she's been the Director of Integrative Wellness here at Williams. So, Wendy. Also, Ned Johnson, our classmate, who's the founder of Prep Matters, counseling and tutoring business. He's also the author of one book solo on conquering the SAT, and then a co-author of...
My mom loved it. It's good. It's good.
Co-author, most importantly, of The Self-Driven Child with William Stixrud.
Yep.
So. And then finally, Carita Mayfield, another classmate who many of you will know. Kerrita, I guess, is also a Dr. Mayfield, though, like me, she's not the kind of doctor who is helpful.
Useful.
So she's an educator, a consultant, and a trainer, and has focused for her entire career on social justice issues and sharing stories of marginalized people. So hopefully we have a wide range of perspectives to share here, and hopefully that'll make for a good and interesting discussion. I wanted to start off by noting that, as Tom said, you'll frequently hear about a crisis in mental health. particularly in colleges. And as an academic, as a professor, I see some of this in the students that I teach at Union College. But I wanted to start off by asking Wendy to sort of give us some of the lay of the land. Is there a crisis in healthcare on campus, and what sort of, how does that manifest here at Williams? So if you could say a few words about that.
Thanks, Chad, and it's so good to be with all of you. I guess I should say welcome home first. It's wonderful to be with you today. It's difficult, I think, sometimes, especially at a time of celebration like a reunion, to come in and talk about things that scare us and things that are difficult. And what I want to acknowledge right off the bat is that we all come into this room today with different journeys, right? Different journeys to hear. Some of us have experienced mental illness. Some of us have people we care about who have experienced mental illness. Some of us are bombarded by headlines about it and don't know exactly what to make of it. And what I just want to acknowledge is that there will be some things we talk about, including in the context of what's happening across colleges nationwide and here at Williams, that will affect each other differently, each of us differently. So having said that, just to kind of get to your question, Chad, I'd like to just paint a context of something much bigger than Williams, which is there's a crisis in college mental health nationwide. What we know statistically from the most recent national data set, which was from 2016, is that roughly 33% of college students have seriously contemplated suicide. 9.3% have actually attempted. And over 25% of college students now report routinely using some type of self-harm, like cutting, burning, hitting themselves in order to manage stress or cope in some way. Those are pretty serious kinds of statistics. When we look at kind of the lived experiences of college students in liberal arts colleges, much like Williams, what we find is that kind of 4 key metrics are also noted nationwide. And these are on specific feeling states that students routinely experience. So we look at what people have experienced in colleges in the last, say, 2 weeks or a month, it's significant. Those are things like feeling overwhelmed. 60% of students in liberal arts colleges report feeling overwhelmed in the last 2 weeks. 60% of those same students report feeling exhausted. 48% of students in the last month report feeling very, very lonely. And 36% of students report feeling hopeless. What we know is all 4 of those are independently risk factors for suicide and explain a lot about what we know nationwide is going on with the statistics on considering suicide. So that's the national landscape, and it is terrifying to think about. And that's probably even a little low in terms of what's happened over the last 2 years now in 2018. At Williams, we've also felt it. We have had an exponential increase in requests for services. We've gone from, in the last 10 years, working with roughly about 13% of the student body in any given year, to working with over 30% of the student body in any given year. We've gone from working in 2009 with graduates that would report if they'd ever used services for psychological services when they, at any point during their career, of 37% to over 60% last year. So what we know is that Williams students are experiencing what we're seeing nationwide. What is astounding is that Williams has chosen to lead in the way that it has and continued to invest resource after resource after resource to meet the increased demand in services. So where we are right now, and we'll get into a little more of this, is that the administration here, and because of the support of our donors, our alumni, and kind of the broad network, has been able to add staff to meet the demand. So we've had an 80% increase in services over the last several years. We've hired and diversified our therapy team in every way, hiring therapists of color, queer therapists, international therapists, and that is continuing, and it's only because of the investment that the college is making in the services that we're providing. And I'm looking forward to talking to you all more about what our long-term vision is for providing services here at Williams.
So the statistics you have on the sort of the growth of this are kind of remarkable, and this seems like this is a thing that occasionally you hear about talked about as like a kids these days sort of thing with they're constantly on smartphones and the face smash and the Insta chat and whatever it is. But this is a problem that goes beyond the context of campus. It's not something that comes from dining hall food. And so I wanted to go next to Ned to talk about sort of, you deal more with students at the pre-college level, and so what are sort of the roots of these issues before students set foot on campus that lead to this?
Well, thanks for asking. And first, I'm really happy to be back here I think a lot of you may feel like I do, sort of back home on campus, acting or feeling like you never left. Because I spent all of my life with high school students, I've never left high school, doing 25 years as test prep. So my job, basically, I help kids prepare for standardized tests. And so I've spent 25 years with juniors in probably the most stressful period of their high school careers. And over time, I took a really keen interest in the effects of stress on performance, because I would routinely have kids who were really bright, and they were well prepared, they were well supported by their parents, they were academic, and then they go and sort of, the tank on the day of the tests. And I always kind of wondered what was going on there. And so I kept hearing, the tests were so much harder than what we did for practice. I thought this seems kind of odd, standardized tests have very few virtues, but one of them is that they're standardized, right? So kind of supposed to be the same thing over and over, right? Right? So I went at age maybe 28, 29, I went to take the test, and I'm sitting there sort of eavesdropping on the teenagers and what are they thinking, and I leaned over, and for no particular reason, checked my own pulse. It was 140 beats a minute. Now this is kind of odd because one, I was always pretty good at standardized tests, and I ended up here, right? And two, knew I didn't have to do well in here because I wasn't coming back to college. As much as I love Williams, I'm sure they didn't want me back.
You had that dream.
Right. And so I really started paying attention to what stress does to performance, and that's kind of part of the work that I do. But with this book I've written with a friend who's a clinical neuropsychologist, I, like anyone who works with young people, have seen and started to take a lot more seriously the effects of stress on basically developing brains. And I think a lot of the challenges that we see with kids in college today started much younger. Right? They started in high school. They may even started, the statistics that Wendy talks about, cascade, start all the way down, at younger and younger ages, and they're really frightening. And the perspective that I have on this is, as much as I want kids to be as educated as they can be, whether they come here or someplace much less academic, that the most important work of childhood and of adolescence is wiring the brain that you're going to have for the rest of your life. So, I'm in awe of people who have wonderful degrees and have gone to places like here, but the idea that if you go to Williams College, that everything is going to be fine and you're going to have this beautiful, perfect life, I wish I could guarantee that, right? Right? For everyone who has a child, if I could say that nothing bad will ever happen to your child, I'd be the happiest guy in the room. But we know that life isn't like that. And so what I think, all of us who work with young people want to be thinking about is how do we help develop brains so that they can, one, be really successful, but probably more importantly, be resilient. Because if you come to a place like Williams, you appropriately should take on things that are more and more challenging. Otherwise, you're kind of wasting your time. But part of taking on challenges is that sometimes you hit a home run and sometimes you strike out. And we don't want kids to be sort of pancaked by the experience of striking out, because otherwise you end up with some very bad outcomes. Or the message they take is, don't do that again. Don't take a risk. And of course, anyone who reads Carol Dweck and all these other things, we know that we want kids to be able to take challenges, but we want them to do it in a way that feels healthy and feels safe. And so for me, I'm really excited by the work that Wendy and the class of '93 center are taking on, because my wife's a Latin teacher. That's my and so I think I'll get this right, but is it mens sana in corpore sano? Did any Latinists out there? Close. Correct me. Healthy mind and a healthy body, right? And it seems to me that so much of education is really pushed more and more and more towards, you have great grades, you're so smart, you're so smart, you're so smart. But we have these very fragile entities in bodies because the brain is just part of the body. And if we don't get that balance right, then we don't get the outcomes that we really want. So I'm really excited about the work that's being done here.
So I think that's a really good point about sort of the connection between mental health and sort of physical health. And I think it's good to remember that everything exists in a wider context of, not just mental, but physical, and exercise and rest and those sorts of things are an essential component of preserving this. To sort of awkwardly transition from that, I'll say that, note that educational issues also don't exist in a vacuum, sort of socially speaking, that everything that we do is embedded in kind of a larger society. And I think that speaks to sort of the social justice issues that Kerrita has worked with. So I wonder if you would like to say a few things about sort of societal contexts and things that aggravate these issues in that sense.
Thank you. And I'm going to start off by being personal, because I tend to be very comfortable being naked. I don't mean it that way. I also work with adolescents, so I just tend to screw up a lot. But Williams is the home of my heart and my mind. And even though I love this place, I feel a little bit of anxiety when I drive up. I'm a little like, oh crap, that surgeon, that doctor, and I teach high schoolers, and I had to beg them to put the caps on the markers, but I drive up. And I just wanted to acknowledge that even though we are in these places and we're adults, we still get those stressors. We still get that anxiety about performance. And so I also was very kind of intentional in putting that in my profile, because I wanted to say, hey, we're fallible, infallible, beautiful, and we're together. And in this community, and I wanted to be honest about that. And that's kind of the ethic that I take in with my students. So I teach, my most recent assignment is with a predominantly brown population. So my school is 96% free and reduced lunch, which is a fancy way of saying poor as hell. And it's a federal designation, so 96% of my students get free breakfast, free lunch, and free snack. And sometimes they get free dinner. So my entire school gets free food. 70% of my students are Latinx. 83% of my school is people of color of some sort. And it's a complicated space. And I say that just to give you some context for what I'm going to talk about in a minute, which is this idea of systemic traumas. And so when I'm thinking about, and I also don't want you to think of my students as just poor, brown, unable, because they're amazing. They're really, really awesome. We went to Pride, and my kid wore high heels for the first time, and she is transitioning. And she was so happy. She had her Queen Elizabeth wave on, and at that moment, with her flag and in her new heels, it was nothing to do with poverty, nothing to do with single parent, nothing to do with loss. So I just want to put that out there. Even though my children have some real systemic traumas, they're really wonderful, complete people. And so my work is as a social justice educator, and I just want to explain each one of those words as I talk about structural trauma. What I'm talking about are students who exist in a system that they don't control. So being brown, they don't control that. Being poor, they don't control that. 35% of my students' heads of households are led by women, and most of those women are under the age of 40. So these are 40-year-olds with teenagers. So you're talking about a really negligible skill transfer because they are children having children. And so they exist in systems of welfare. They exist in a school-to-prison pipeline. They exist in a system where they have a lot of loss. They may have lost their parent to the prisons. They may have lost their parents to drug abuse. They may just have lost their parents. And so they exist in a place where it's really easy to feel like the world is arrayed against you because you don't get to control the adults in your life and you don't get to control the systems and structures you interact with. Like, if you are jobless in the state of Massachusetts, you have to go down to the stupid little office, and then you wait in line, and it's only open 2 hours, 3 days a week. So your life is controlled, and if you don't go, and if you don't fill out the form, you may or may not get your check. So your life is completely, transcribed. Anyway,
Circumscribed.
you're held hostage. That's nice. You're held hostage by these structures you don't control. And so it visits upon my students lots of systemic traumas. I think Ned talked about this idea of resilience. I mean, my students, it's a beautiful buzzword, but my students build resilience by these encounters. They don't build resilience because of the other brilliant adults in their lives, which kind of makes me useless at my job. But so what we try to do a lot is deal with the social. I mean, as a teacher, part of my work is to help my students build community. I mean, it's very easy if you exist in this world of kind of domination, which is kind of the definition of being an adolescent, frankly, because everybody has power and they tell you what to do and you're emergent and you hate it. But how to build community with each other, how to recognize their own gifts and share them. So I'm a curricular designer as a science teacher, and so I design a curriculum where my students have to share, where they have to say, this is what I'm good at, and I'm going to show you, help you, be with you. And in that, they build a community of gifts. That's the social part of my work. The justice part of my work is really talking about equity and access. So, I mean, I teach biology, so people don't talk about biomacromolecules. No one gets a rush from that, except for me. And then they say I'm corny. But so we talk about this idea of equity and access. So giving them a buffet of learning options and saying, you have access to this. This is a tool. I know it doesn't look like a tool. I know it's an annoying tool. I know you don't want to lift it up. But let's talk about how it can work for you and how you can work for it to meet your own long-term goals. And this, of course, all comes because I'm privileged to have gone here. And the third part of social justice educator for me is this idea of educator. So my work is in schools and with youth to build structures and systems that help students be their best selves, and not that kind of like BS, you show up, get a trophy kind of best self, but a best self where my kids can leave their classroom saying, you know what, I'm a great lab partner. I'm really good at quizzes. I'm a very good studier. I know how to take pristine notes. This aspect of notes appeals to me. I have really good test strat. And then we can then talk about what biomacromolecules are. And so we're trying to build up these three-dimensional complete humans, and also building up and building a community with the adults. Because the other part about structural trauma as a teacher is the secondary trauma of working with people who's, for one example, I have this wonderful kid who just got a number of awards yesterday in our awards ceremony, who watched her mother's boyfriend kill her little brother who had cancer. There's nothing I can do to fix that. I mean, so we have to talk, we will talk about structures. I don't want to leave you with that because it's horrible. But we will talk about solutions, that's our next step. But part of my work is also helping teachers develop systems where we work with these kids in an open, trauma-aware way, which opens us up to those traumas, but also how do we release that from ourselves and how do we help our students develop systems and structures where they can be adaptable in a world they don't control.
Thank you. So I think that's an excellent point. That the next thing to move on to is to talk about, how do you navigate, how do you manage the situation that sort of currently exists. So I'll come back to Ned. Can you say some things about, this is going to be of interest to a lot of the class as we're sort of in that demographic of, many of us having kids that are moving into college prep, college. And so on.
Sure. Yeah. There's a great researcher named Sonia Lupien who's up in Montreal, and she makes the point that really everything that's stressful to a human nervous system can be summarized with the acronym NUTS. So N is novelty, U is unpredictability, which make traffic so challenging. T is threat. Some people have physical threats, and perhaps but the communities that a lot that us might live in, they're more likely to be threats to ego, right? Am I going to look stupid? And then S is for a low sense of control. And the science suggests that a low sense of control is about the most stressful thing in the universe, that you can handle situations of novelty and of unpredictability. And maybe I'll look silly in class here, so long as you feel like there's something productive that you can do. It's when people are in situations where they can't exit them at all that really bad things happen. So developing coping mechanisms oftentimes is nothing more than helping people, as Kerrita talked about, having tools to help them navigate situations that they would really rather avoid, but it is what it is. There's a great researcher named Stephen Meyer who did this experiment with mice, and he had mice in a cage, and they attached electrodes to their tails. and then they shocked the heck out of them, and so that was not a great way to spend your morning. And they'd watch the cortisol just blow off, through the top of their heads. But then he put this little wheel in the cage with them. And so when the light went off and they knew they were about to get shocked, if they spun the wheel, the shock would stop. So they had the sense of control that they could end the shock. And so even though they were still being shocked, this sense of control massively decreased the cortisol in their brains. So it was basically a coping mechanism. Now, in a really clever feat, he then disconnected the wheel rather. So the light goes off, I'm a rat, I'm a mice, I'm about to be shocked. I spin a little wheel, it doesn't work, nobody sent me the memo, I don't have an iPhone to tell time, so I'm not really clear on that. But because I've been conditioned to think that this little wheel is going to stop the shock, I still get shocked as bad as it started, but spinning the wheel makes me feel a whole lot better. And so what we really want to be doing for ourselves and for children is to give them coping mechanisms, right? I mean, so much of what I see about the idea of helicopter parenting is that I don't want anything bad to ever happen to my children or your children, and so I run around constantly trying to, relieve, eliminate all obstacles. But that's not how we develop resilience, right? We develop resilience, as Kerrita would say, with supporting adults around us, and we are able to get through it, ideally with the help of friends, family, and community. But moving forward, the world it's a scarier place than we grew up in, it seems to me. And so we probably need a more robust set of tools. But we don't want to wait until, certainly part of what the center is trying to do is to help college students have tools to handle new and difficult situations. But it seems to me that as a country, we don't want to wait until they darken your door, second semester of sophomore year, having pancaked. You want to start that process a whole lot earlier, because there are things that we can picture in anyone's life. There are challenges we know are going to happen. And so if we start trying to give kids tools to feel in control, to have those coping mechanisms early on, I think it'll do them a world of good when they face higher challenges later on.
So this is the extremely rare circumstance in which you want people to be spinning their wheels.
Nicely said, nicely said.
So I think that's an excellent idea of building coping mechanisms, and also, as you said, of getting sort of structures with other people cooperatively to do this. So I'm going to go back to Kerrita. You mentioned something about how do we build structures for students who are currently in the current environment to help them navigate things effectively.
Cool, thank you. Grace Lee Boggs talks about the idea that we need as many revolutionaries as we have, we also need solutionaries. And I love that idea of being a solutionary. I'm just passionate about how do we problem solve systems and structures. And there are things about my students' identities, personalities, home lives I can't erase or fix. But what we do is I approach the curriculum that I design with them, and this is small scale talk. It's 120 kids, it's a building of 1,300 people. We design curriculum that has all these strategies that are de-escalation or strategies of independence or strategies of control built into the curriculum design. So intentionally designing a space where students are given options, where they are given power, where they are allowed to vote. When is this quiz? I know these things may seem super small, but I can't tell you the impact that they have on people who do not have a lot of access to systemic or personal power, which is the definition of being an adolescent, frankly, but is definitely heightened by the other kind of structural traumas of like racism and classism and sexism. And so some of the strategies that we use, aside from giving our students control and choice, we build skills and confidence. Every assignment has jobs. And so the kids have to decide, what's my job? What am I good at? Do I have multiple jobs? Do I have multiple gifts? And do I want to use them today? All choices that give them a little bit of power in that hour that I have them. One of the things we do before tests, we do box breathing. So, because my students get very, very ramped up. I have a test in 4 hours, 8 days, and so we do box breathing. It's, close your eyes, do your box breathing. Just get settled, get in the moment, and then access your power, feel your power, because you all have power. I don't like how you use it all the time, but you all have it, access it, calm down, just calm your pants, and then, remember your test strategies, remember your skill set, and then go. We talked, because learning is inherently discordant. It's what I love about it. It's what they hate about it. We're always adjusting our schema and rearranging our world to learn new stuff. So the very act of learning something new causes them stress. One of the things that we do at the very beginning of the year is we make comfort objects, which it seems kind of weird to spend your time in high school making comfort objects, but we take polymer clay, which you can bake. See, I'm using my art degree, go Williams. So I get a bunch of polymer clay, often donated, and various texture tools that every kid makes a comfort item. And it is amazing when you say to them, where's your comfort object? And they're like, oh yeah, it's in my backpack. Oh yeah, it's in my something. Often it's at home, but sometimes they bring them to school. And they can then have this object that they made that they can hold, and it has these ridges and textures, and it just reminds them to be in the moment. It reminds them that they made something. And here's a little tiny piece of pocket power that just gets them rooted. And one of the things we also do in my classroom is honest and clear feedback. So not the kind of like, you look beautiful today when your hair is a mess kind of feedback, or the, here's a trophy for showing up kind of feedback. But, this is what you're good at. These are your gifts. These are how your gifts can play out in the real world. These are the things that you do really well, have you thought about? So really giving our kids very, very clear feedback. So that they can then take that, put that in their pockets, and apply it to other places. The other danger, I think, of teaching, high school in a very kind of small scale way is the work and all of these good solutionary items get isolated and left. But with a comfort object, you can take it to your next class. If you are a good writer in my class, you're going to be a good writer someplace else. If you can box breathe now with me, you can box breathe through the SATs, through the MCAT, MCAS, LSATs. These are all skills that are portable. So that's the other piece that I try to do with my students is give them these spaces where whatever we do together in our one little space and time can go out with them into the world. So you can use this when you're taking your driver's test. You can't take your little object with the SATs, but you can have it in the car during the lunch break. So we really talk about skills that are small, but also have universal impact in how they move through the world. So that's part of the solutions that I'm working on with my students every day.
Great. So we've talked a bunch now about ways to navigate the current situation as it exists. Of course, one of the goals here is to improve that situation, is to not have students having to navigate the same minefield, as it were. So I want to come back to Wendy to talk a bit about what's sort of the longer term vision. We've described a situation that's very not good. How do we make that better going forward for students in the medium to long term here at Williams?
Okay, great, thank you. Well, I think that as I mentioned, the college has invested robustly in trying to add more and more therapists essentially to meet the demand. And while that's incredible and it's a place of privilege for the college to be able to have these very low ratios of students per therapist relative to really any other colleges or universities in the country, it's not really a long-term solution, because what we know is that the demand is going to always outpace it. I mean, I've been here since November of 2016. We've added 2.5 full-time therapists and just got approved to add another one next year. I've never asked for so many personnel in a budget in my whole career, just in the last 2 years or year and a half. And so it's not the long-term solution. I think the other thing is that while students are here, they experience unlimited access to psychological care. And what that means is we have in-house psychological care, so counseling, we have psychiatric care for medication management and that sort of thing, as well as 24-hour on-call crisis managed by our therapists in-house. Well, it's fantastic support. It's also unlike anything people will experience once they graduate. Some of you may have experienced that there's this robust support here, and then you leave here and it's like, whoa, what is this world we're walking into? And so there's this balance of wanting to provide ongoing clinical care because of how isolated the college is and because of the unique needs of the student population, and quite frankly, because Williams is invested in taking care of its students. But we also want to make sure students emerge prepared to go into the complicated world that they go into with differential access to resources. So what that looks like is we want to continue to provide this high level of clinical care, But we also want to think about how do we promote well-being amongst students? How do we build the kinds of skill sets that colleagues here on the panel have been talking about, and do that while they're in college as an expectation? What we know from research and from clinical practice is that we as individuals have needs physically, psychologically, emotionally, socially, and spiritually. We kind of think about it as heart, mind, body, and spirit. But each one of these areas of the self needs specific kinds of care and attention. Williams students, you may have been like this, tend to be very mind and body dominated, right? So you'll stay up, you'll study, you'll be extraordinarily proficient in mind until literally you can't function anymore. Right. Some people can relate. There's also commitment to exercise. There's a lot of athletes on campus and people who do a lot to take care of their bodies. But what we tend to find is that the other aspects of self, emotional and some social needs as well as spiritual needs, tend not to be as prominent in terms of value, right? There's value in performance physically and psychologically, but not as much in these other areas. And that's not uncommon. It's not just at Williams. What we want to do is ultimately develop a model, and we're already involved in this now, where we, as an expectation of being at Williams, develop skill sets for students and give them a chance to practice them and get support for them while they're here in taking care of themselves in heart, mind, body, and spirit, so that they can recognize, okay, I know I need sleep, but then how does, when I don't get sleep, affect me emotionally and psychologically? Do I recognize that when I stay up all night, my performance actually goes down, it doesn't go up? Can I recognize that the reason why I'm running 5 extra miles as part of my training is because I'm socially feeling isolated and alone here? Can I reach out and recognize what I'm needing and find the help that I need, not just through therapy, but through a larger cultural milieu that will support this kind of development of well-being? We conceptualize this as a competency, all right, as looking at one of the many competencies that can be built through the college education, so that we don't just work with students who end up in therapy. We ideally start from before they even get here, building in an expectation that one of the things that they will do is learn how to be a healthy person while they're here, healthy in heart, mind, body, and spirit. So we'll teach them skills, things that the research demonstrates can help with this, things like mindfulness, things like self-compassion and gratitude. These are current skill sets in the research that really have an impact on overall well-being. We'll look at what we teach in therapy. So we know students come in crisis. How do I regulate emotionally, right? If I'm feeling a sense of distress, can I integrate that into my overall functioning? What we have is a generation with unique needs. The reason why we're having this incredible spike in need for services, as well as some of the frightening consequences when students don't have needs met, is because they have unique needs as a generation. And we have to look deeply into what those needs are to understand that the cultural needs of this generation relative to what well-being will look like are very different than I experienced and that many of us in this room experienced. So we are in the process of developing this competency of what exactly the information that students need, what skills they need to practice, what they need to experience, so that we don't just eliminate what's hard. We're not going to eliminate what's hard at Williams, right? That's not realistic. Williams students come in and have the capacity to go out and lead in every way. We don't want to diminish that. We just want to make sure that they know how to take care of themselves, even and especially in an environment that is so rigorous and challenging, so that then they leave here with those skills and can teach them to their coworkers, to their partners, to their children, right? We start to have an impact in a much broader way through the skill sets that students here leave here being able to implement. And that's kind of a longer term vision.
So I think that's a really interesting point. I mean, we only have a few minutes left, but I think I wanted to sort of spin off that and you know, obviously it's relatively easy to see what our contribution can be to integrative wellness at Williams, which is write checks. But the question of, we're in a community here this weekend of, well beyond our class that has an enormous amount of privilege and influence and even some degree of power. And the question is there something we can or should be doing to sort of leverage that network, those resources to the benefit of not just students here, but more widely? Are there things that we ought to be doing? And I will throw that to any of you who would like to take on that enormously huge question.
Well, I like money.
Money is good.
Money's good. Money's great. I mean, seriously, I do like it, and my students need it. But I always think about skills and confidence, that you can't build confidence unless you have skills, and you can't build skills unless you have confidence. And so for me as a practitioner, it's a two-pronged approach that you have to do simultaneously, mediated, of course, by money. But that, for me, is my big one, is skills and confidence as they interact. As there's in fact, you talked a lot about this idea of longevity of skills, and that if you're confident in them, you're going to deploy them in multiple places with multiple people. And that's very powerful, I think, for people and for people in crisis.
For me, it's really always an issue of balance. I mean, one way that I sort of look at a lot of mental health challenges that people develop, particularly with anxiety and depression, one really nice model to develop either of those afflictions is really simply to be too tired and too stressed for too long. I work with students who are sort of burning the candle at both ends for years. And it's sort of a cautionary tale. I said, if you think about soldiers who come back from war, I said, well, you understand that these guys, develop PTSD, because they're really a bunch of sissies. And they look at me, and I said, no, these are the most brave men and women on the planet, but they come back profoundly changed because it's too much, right? And what we really want to do is have a balance where, as Wendy said, we want students here at Williams to be as exceptional as they can be, because they're going to transform the world in all sorts of wonderful ways. But rest is the basis of all activity, whether it's physical rest or spiritual rest. And so I think the balance in the last probably a couple decades has really shifted away, where it really should be work hard, rest hard. Or as a colleague of mine said, he said his mantra in college was to sleep more than you study, and study more than you party, but party as much as you can. Which I thought was pretty good, right? So I think if we were all, we have in the book we wrote the idea that there's a nap for that. And I think if most of us were all just a little bit more well-rested, the world would feel more peaceful. In part because, in terms of the development of the brain, the prefrontal cortex, right, is all these executive functions, planning, figuring out your world, emotional flexibility, so on and so forth. And the amygdala is the stress response. And when we are in our right minds, our higher functions modulate or regulate our stress response. But when we're tired, the amygdala is about 60% more reactive. And so this is why you'll notice when you're really tired, people around you feel more angry, more cranky. I was talking with a student of mine the other day. I said, do you ever notice when you're really tired, you feel like your mom is just like more annoying than ever? And he's really sharp, and he stops, and my gosh, I must be tired all the time. So, I think all of us would do. For me, I'm sort of an acolyte for sleep, because even from an athletic performance, we know that if you work hard and then get enough sleep, you get a Stanford sleep study. You'll be a better athlete if you're more well rested. So I love what you're doing and talk about the balance of all things. But for me, don't stop working hard. Just make sure you rest hard along with it.
So I think that's probably an excellent place to end. And coincidentally, we're also basically out of time. Okay. So thank you to all of our panelists here. And thanks again to all of you for coming out. And we urge you to go out and be kinder to people and also take a nap.
Right.